Hello, everybody. Welcome. Let me just get onto my first slide. Okay. So, you're ready? Yeah? Okay, I'm ready. Let's go. So, design keeps evolving. New tools, new systems, and new intelligence. It can feel overwhelming at times, but it's also what keeps our craft alive. And this talk is about finding calm in the chaos. It's about embracing imperfection and remembering that the most human thing we can do is to keep learning. So, hello everyone. So my name is Matt. So a little bit about me. I've worked in the design industry now for over 2 decades, and I've seen a lot of change over that time. And we'll get onto some of that lately, shortly after this. So I'm currently a design lead at GSK in the commercial and medical customer experience team, where among other things, I help manage the design systems that underpin our digital marketing platforms. And what else about me? I'm a bit of a francophone. I have an amazing French partner who incidentally also works for GSK. She's not a designer, she's a scientist. So on another site entirely. We also have 2 wonderful kids who are both far too clever for their own good and naughty. And also a very handsome but very dumb cat called Marcel. Nice French name there. So, I'm also a bit of a nerd, and I love things like, and some of the GSK people here, they won't know about this about me, so you're going to learn some stuff tonight. I love things like painting Warhammer miniatures, yes, and astronomy, although I'm not very good at either of them. As you can see, I'm particularly proud of this blob on the bottom left. That's actually Jupiter with some of its moons. And also just above it here, this one, that's Saturn. But you'll have to take my word for it. You try taking a picture with a mobile phone through a telescope, you'll see how hard it is. But yeah, that is Saturn, believe it or not. This is also probably the first time a Space Marine has been in a GSK PowerPoint presentation, so I can see the GSK team sweating a little bit at the back there. But, I also love watching movies, TV, reading books, all the usual stuff, playing video games and so on. I especially like horror and sci-fi genre, so you're going to see some references along the way. Okay, so let's get into it. So let's start by talking about a man who lived 2,500 years ago, and his name was Heraclitus. He's a famously miserable Greek philosopher. He was also known as the weeping philosopher because apparently he was so overwhelmed by how awful people were that he cried all the time. And that's why when you find pictures of him, you can see he's actually, weeping there. It's a little dramatic, but each to his own. However, he did say something that I think is still very relevant today, especially to us as designers or design curious. The only constant in life is change. And I like that line, but I don't think Heraclitus was saying that change is necessarily bad. He was saying it's inevitable. And that's a relief, really, because if you're a designer, change is your job description. We design things, we test, we iterate, and we release stuff. Then someone says, I want you to make it pop, and then you have to start all over again. It's change. Heraclitus is also famous for saying you never step into the same river twice, which in modern terms is like saying you never step into the same Figma file twice. I think this is an image from Zero Height. Credits to Zero Height there, but I thought it summed it up completely. Each time you step into a new Figma file or a Figma file, someone's moved a frame, they've renamed a bunch of layers, they've hidden a design iteration on a branch called Final Draft Final Version 3B. You can relate, yes, I'm laughing, you can relate to that. So change isn't new, but how we handle it, that's what defines us. And that's what I want to talk about today. So when we talk about change, what are we really talking about? Because it's not just new hardware or software updates. It's usually one of 3 things: tools, teams, or trends. Tools change constantly, as we know. Our favorite apps push updates and new features frequently. AI designs your components before you've even finished thinking of them. A tool you relied on yesterday is suddenly out of fashion. Sorry, Sketch and XD and teams change, people move on, Budgets shift, priorities flip. I'm sure you can relate to all of this. One reorg later in your design team. Design system now lives in a completely different business unit with a completely different team. And trends, that's a tricky one. What looked modern and elegant last year suddenly starts to feel dated. Anyone remember flat design? Yeah, skeuomorphism, grunge, deconstructivism, showing my age here. Each one in its time felt new, fresh, and superior until the next trend comes along. So we can't control that pace of change, but we can control our mindset. The mindset to pause and ask which changes actually matter. For me, I think that our principles survive our tool changes. Our collaboration habits survive our team changes. And a clear definition of success survives taste changes. If you base everything on the right principles, healthy collaboration, and the knowledge of what success looks like, and the tools, team, and trends don't matter in the end. So change itself isn't the problem, but thinking we can stop it is. Our job is to stay flexible enough to keep our principles upright, even when everything shifts around us like it is now. That's how we design, not against change, but with it. So, again, showing my age a bit here, but I started out as a graphic designer in the late 90s, the very late 90s, back when layouts were still often done on drawing boards. When I studied at college, at university, we did designs on drawing boards with pens and paper. Photoshop, when I first used Photoshop, only had one layer and one undo. Imagine that. So if you did something wrong, you could go back once, and that was it. And then you had to start again. But then came the web. I remember building sites entirely out of tables and sliced up images. Then Flash arrived and everyone lost their minds. Dancing logos, 3D buttons, sound effects, I've done it all. To hell with accessibility. I'm not even sure we knew what accessibility was back then. We were all animators for about 5 minutes. Any Flash apologists in the room? I loved Flash. It was great, yeah. I want it back. But then mobile came along and suddenly everything looked ridiculous on a 3-inch screen. Plus Apple killed off Flash, which in hindsight wasn't such a bad thing. So we learned again. jQuery, React, Sketch, Figma, from style guides to design systems. Every wave of change has forced us as designers to grow. And the successful designers, I think, are the ones who've been able to adapt, because we're still here. So I suppose now you'd call me a product designer or a UXer or a design lead, depending on who I'm talking to or what the particular flavor of the month is. I think Shopify recently have gone back to simply saying designer. It's like we've gone full circle. But really, like all designers, I'm just a problem solver with a particular set of skills. And that is a reference from Taken, obviously. Now, Liam Neeson might have used his skills for hunting down kidnappers, but I use mine for design, which admittedly is slightly less cinematic, but it's still about saving people from bad situations, right? So today, as we look at change, consider it as something not to fear, but something that defines us and shapes us and keeps our work alive. Because the truth is, design is never done. Every project, every pattern, every Figma component is just a snapshot, a frozen moment in time. And that's a good thing, because if it was done, then there would be nowhere else to go. Our jobs as designers isn't to make perfect systems. It's to make systems that can grow. We talk a lot about craft, but what we're really doing is managing evolution, giving teams a shared language for change. And sometimes that language can get a bit complicated. Nowhere do we wrestle with perfection more than in design systems. I was reading an article recently about design system trends, and one example made me laugh and want to cry at the same time. It talked about how some teams, in the pursuit of perfection, create tokens for everything, literally hundreds of them. And so you end up with things like component, marquee, space, inset, 2x, media, query S. And then they wonder why it takes 6 months to ship anything. Sometimes we get so obsessed with perfection that we forget who we're building for. Systems start serving themselves instead of serving the people who use them. So I want to talk a little bit about Omni. So this is our design system at GSK in our particular department. We have a number of design systems, but our one in commercial medical is called Omni. And we kind of fell into that trap initially. We started to tokenize everything. It looked great. It ticks all the design system boxes until our actual users, the agencies, the designers, the marketers, started to try to use our design system. And they found it confusing. So we took a step back and asked, why are we doing this? Who are we doing it for? So for version 2, we stripped it down. We only tokenized the things that the users shouldn't touch. And then everything else we kept as normal Figma styles that those end users could actually edit easily. And the end result was that we have happier end users, faster adoption, fewer messages asking, how do I change the color of that button again? The lesson was simple. Sometimes making progress actually means doing less. And that experience leads us to a principle I'd like to share with you now. I believe that a good design system should make the common 80% of work effortless, consistent, accessible, and on brand, so that teams can get on with their day-to-day tasks. But those who need a little extra flex can spend their energy on the remaining 20%. And that 20%, I believe, is where the creativity lives. It's where differentiation happens, and it's where humans matter most in that process. If you lock everything down, you don't get consistency, you get conformity, and conformity doesn't inspire anyone. You need that 80% structure, agreed, but you need that 20% creativity as well, which is a healthy ratio for design and, I believe, for life in general, actually. And when we talk about creativity, that 20%, it's worth remembering that most of what we call new isn't actually new at all. That 20% of creativity, it's where we find our version of originality. This guy here, that's Mark Twain. So he once wrote, there's no such thing as a new idea. It's impossible. We simply take a lot of old ideas and put them into a sort of mental kaleidoscope. We give them a turn and make them new, and we make new and curious combinations. I think he was right. We spend so much time chasing originality, trying to be the first to do something new. But the truth is, there are no new things, not really. Every idea, every interface pattern, every trend is built on what came before. We remix things, we reinterpret them, and then we refine them. And that's not a bad thing. That's what creativity is. It's connecting familiar dots in unfamiliar ways. And that same idea, remixing, is exactly what's happening with AI. AI doesn't invent, it resynthesizes. The difference is we bring meaning to those combinations. We decide why they matter. So maybe it's freeing to actually realize we don't have to be original. We just have to care about why it matters. Because change doesn't always mean creating something new. Sometimes it means seeing the old with fresh eyes. So I want to tell you about a simple pattern that I've noticed myself, and probably a lot of you as well are doing the same. A pattern that I've noticed myself following whenever I work with AI-powered tools. I'm going to call it the 3 A's, augment, audit, and align. And it's not by chance that I borrowed the squiggle. Some of you might be familiar with the squiggle here by Damien Newman, because I think it shows perfectly how ideas evolve from ambiguity to clarity. With augment, I let the AI do what it's good at: speed, structure, boilerplating. I give it a bunch of jumbled notes, bunch of voice recordings, and then ask it to do its thing. Generate the skeleton of a component, draft a user interview, summarize feedback, create a design checklist. It's not cheating, it's a head start. Then we have audit. This is where I slow down and review what the AI has generated. I check the ethics, I check the language, the brand alignment, and so on. This is where my craft and experience and your craft and experience really matter in this process. And then align. You need to bring it back to humans. I share, validate, and connect it to actual goals, because AI doesn't care if it fits your design standards or your design system. You care. Because the important thing to grasp is it's not man versus machine, it's man with machine, and that pattern helps keep me grounded. I augment the start, I audit the middle, and I align the end. And that's also the 80-20 principle in action as well. You automate the easy bits and focus on our human time on where it actually counts. So thinking back to our friend Heraclitus, AI is the next big current in our river, and it's moving fast. With tools like GitHub Copilot, Lovable, Figma Make, Builder.io, and so on, we can now generate working coded designs within minutes from plain text prompts. And with the introduction of MCP servers, our tools are no longer just interoperable, they're finally able to start understanding each other, acting as a translation layer between AI agents and our design systems, enabling code, design, and content to speak the same language. And it's incredible and slightly terrifying, if I'm honest. This is all really new to me. So we all know that AI can get you to something fast, but that something still needs a human to finish the job. AI is amazing at pattern matching, prediction, efficiency, but it doesn't understand empathy, accessibility, or nuance, not yet at least. It can give you the first 80%, but it's the human 20%, that last mile, that actually brings the meaning. So as design systems help us standardize the 80%, and AI is starting to help us automate a lot of what we do, that means our roles as designers are shifting again, from making things to making sense of things. So a few years ago, the film Ex Machina explored exactly that question. And it's a fantastic film, by the way. If you haven't seen it, I'd encourage you to watch it. It's really, really interesting. So it explores what happens when the line between machine and human becomes blurred. When I first saw it, it felt like science fiction, like pure science fiction. And now, only 10 years later, although 10 years does seem still quite scary, it feels like it's just around the corner, like we're on the verge of something. We're already talking to chatbots that can write, draw, create music, and design better than me, better than most of us probably. And we're even debating whether AI can have taste. And that's an important question. Can AI truly understand the people it's creating for? Leah Tharin summed this up perfectly in her recent article, Why AI Cannot Simulate Your Customer's Behavior, which she wrote in response to a research paper claiming AI could soon replace traditional customer research. And I'm sure that's something that a lot of our companies that we work for have been considering. She disagreed, pointing out that while large language models are phenomenal pattern matching machines, they don't reason. They can be trained on large amounts of research data, sure, but people don't behave like data sets. The key call out was that humans will often say one thing, but then do something completely different. And it's that gap between what we say and what we feel where real understanding lives. AI can mimic empathy, but it can't mean it. It can generate fantastic looking things for us, but not the intent behind it. That gap between imitation and intention is where we as designers still matter, where we can bring value. What humans bring to the table is our ability to empathize, learn, adapt, and improve through experience. Which brings me on to something else that really stuck with me recently and kind of was the genesis of this whole talk, really. So I was listening to a podcast featuring Simon Sinek. You probably heard of him. He popularized the phrase, start with why. In the podcast, he said, we think AI will remove all the struggle. And the problem is, it will. But what you'll end up with is an entire generation of people who are entry level for their whole lives, because they will have learned nothing, even though all their products are fantastic. And that hit me hard, and I could not get it out of my head, because it made me realize that it's in the struggle where we do our learning. If everything becomes easy, we don't grow. I don't want to look back in 5 or 10 years' time and find myself in a place of stagnation, and I'm sure you don't want to either. So I mentioned at the start that I love video games. In particular, I love really tough video games. And it's the kind that most people would give up on after 5 minutes and say, why would I want to waste my time with this? But the truth is, I actually thrive on the challenge. That process of messing up, trying again, and slowly progressing towards mastery. For me, it's not really about the outcome. It's about learning, improving, and getting a little better each time. And I put it to you that design isn't just about outcomes either. It's also just as much about the process. We mentioned earlier, it's about how you collaborate, how you recover when a client or stakeholder doesn't get your work, when a design review goes completely off the rails. If you use AI to take away all the friction, all those "why isn't this working" moments, when you want to throw your mouse across the room, or in my case, the controller, you risk losing the craft that makes you who you are. Which made me think, if it's in the struggle where we learn, maybe that's where we find our real advantage. If AI can get us to good outcomes faster, the real question becomes, where's our value now as designers? I believe we find it in the process, that messy middle, that part we sometimes rush past because it's uncomfortable, the workshops that meander, the prototypes that fail, the feedback that stings a little because it's true. Take a quick moment to think about some of the defining moments in your career. I bet a lot of them were times of challenge, not when everything went smoothly. I know that's the case for me, because we learn far more, I find, from the hard times than from the moments when someone simply says, "You've done a great job." One of my first bosses, not John here, but one of my first bosses was notorious for getting us to start again if something wasn't good enough. And he would say it in that voice. It was frustrating. It was really frustrating, but it taught me an important lesson. Never accept mediocrity. Always ask yourself, could this be better? Does it fulfill all the user and all the business requirements? And of course, he was usually right, even though I didn't want to admit it at the time. That is the good stuff. That's where we sharpen what no AI can: judgment, empathy, and taste. So don't design the struggle out of your process, design with it. Let AI take the grunt work, of course, but keep the curiosity, the friction, and the reflection. Because the real value isn't what AI makes, it's what we become through the making. I'm reminded of H.G. Wells' famous quote, and sorry, this is another quote. I do like quotes. This is the last one, I promise. "Adapt or perish, now as ever, is nature's inexorable imperative." This was one of Wells's final works, a short philosophical reflection written near the end of his life, where he explored the limits of human progress in the face of rapid change. I think it's just as relevant today, but maybe it's more like AI-dapt or perish. See what I did there? Name of the talk. We can't stop these changes, but we can shape how we respond. And that probably means reskilling, upskilling, cross-skilling, and even unlearning habits that no longer serve us. I know I'm having to do that constantly. And yes, that is uncomfortable. I find it deeply uncomfortable. But this kind of discomfort is what will help you grow. Just as we move from static HTML to responsive design, from pixels to tokens, we'll move again into AI-assisted, agentic, adaptive design. In fact, we already are. But that's not the end of design. It's just design evolving again. What keeps us relevant isn't how fast or efficiently we work, it's how deeply we care. AI can copy our syntax, but not our empathy. It can generate layout options, but it can't sit in a user interview and sense hesitation in someone's voice. It can't walk into a meeting, see that someone else's idea has just got ignored, and bring it back into the conversation. That's our advantage as designers. That's what will always make design, real design, human. Because when everything else changes, when tools, frameworks, trends, and our roles keep shifting, because they are and they will, empathy is the one constant that never becomes obsolete. So let's connect the dots. We've survived changes in our tool sets. We've adapted our changes to changes in our teams. We've weathered the storms of taste. Now we're facing huge changes in our process, with AI creating alongside us. But here's the thing, designers have always thrived in flux. We're experts at turning ambiguity into clarity. We take mess and we make meaning. That's what we do. We're problem solvers. The only time change defeats us is when we stop learning, when we cling to old ways because it's comfortable. That's why I always try to tell myself, if something feels hard, you're probably growing. If it feels impossible, you're likely onto something important. So don't fear change. Use it as a mirror. Try and ask yourself, what's this moment trying to teach me? So here's where I'll leave you. Change will keep coming, faster, stranger, messier than we'd probably like. But that's okay, because as designers, we've always been good at this. We've built entire careers around adapting, learning, and improving. Every time that river shifts course, we find a new way to swim across. So when you're feeling overwhelmed by all the AI headlines, or the next design system trend, or whatever the next big thing turns out to be, just remember this. Double down on being human. Bring empathy, curiosity, and meaning into your work. And above all else, be kind to yourself and to the people you work with. The only constant is change, and our constant is how we respond. Thank you.